Hello, boys and girls. I hope that you all are having a great day. Today is April the 1st, 2020. I know when we're at home, it's sometimes hard to keep up with the date, but today is April the 1st, which is sometimes and often known as April Fool's Day. So, I have a special story that I want to share with you called April Fool, Watch Out at School. So, if you don't know about April Fool's Day, April the 1st on April Fool's, sometimes people like to play tricks on each other and other people, and then they go back and say, April Fools. So, we're going to read to find out what happens in this story. And you know, in our classes, we've read about this character before. Remember, a character is a person or an animal that plays a part in a story. And Gilbert, this is Gilbert. We've read stories about him before. So he's going to be in this story. So we're going to read to see what he does. Now, as we read, there's something that I want you to be looking for on each page. So on each page, there is a trick. There's something that is there that isn't supposed to be there. And we won't talk about all of them at the end of the story, but we're going to talk about a few of them, okay? So after we finish the story, I want you to see if you can remember some of the things that you saw on the pages as I show them to you that are tricks that aren't supposed to be there. All right, so the title of this is April Fool, Watch Out at School. It is written by Diane DeGroat, okay? And she also is the illustrator. Now, how do I know that? Remember, because she's the only name listed on my book. So when you see a book and there's only one name listed, that means that that person wrote the words and drew the pictures. So let's read together to find out. Remember, you're watching for those tricks, okay? Gilbert woke up and looked at the calendar. It was April the 1st, April Fool's Day. He hopped out of bed and started filling his backpack with tricks to play on his friends. His sister Lola peeked in the door and said, "Knock, knock." Gilbert answered, "Who's there?" "April Fool," Lola shouted. Gilbert laughed and explained, "You're supposed to play a trick on someone, not tell jokes." "Okay," Lola said, "do a trick on me." But Gilbert didn't have time to play tricks on his sister. He was already out the door. So here they go. Gilbert met Patty on the corner. As they walked to school, Patty suddenly said, "Watch out, Gilbert, your shoe's untied." Gilbert stopped to tie his shoe, but it was already tied. "Gotcha," Patty said. "April Fool." Gilbert laughed. He couldn't wait to try that trick on someone else. Principal Pug smiled when he saw them. "Morning good," he said. "Day nice, have." He was talking backwards. The bell rang and Patty said to Gilbert, "Up, hurry, let's." All right, look closely at these pages. See if you see anything that looks different. Mrs. Bird was not smiling or waving. She said, "Put away your tricks so we can get started on our reading lesson. Gilbert, please start on page 10. Gilbert stood up and read out loud. "Where is my book?" Sam asked. "I need it now." Mrs. Bird stopped him and said, "When someone reads out loud, it would be nice to know where the punctuation marks are." Then she said, "Here's an idea. When you come to a period, say, pop. When you see a quotation mark, that means someone is talking, say, question mark can be, huh? And the exclamation point is a boing. Try it. So there's Mrs. Bird. Pay attention to the date on the board. And there's Gilbert reading. Gilbert took a deep breath and started over. Where is my book? Huh? Sam asked. Pop. I need it now. Boing. Whew, Gilbert said. This is hard. Lewis said, and it sure is funny. Boing. Everyone laughed. Mrs. Bird laughed too and said, thank you for being such a good sport, Gilbert. April Fool. Gilbert sat down and made a loud sound in his seat. That wasn't me, he cried. Somebody put a whoopee cushion in there. Gotcha, Lewis said. They finished their reading silently, but Gilbert kept thinking pop and boing whenever he saw a period or an exclamation point. He also kept thinking about how he could play a trick on Lewis. He had hot, spicy gum in his pocket, so he turned to Lewis and asked, would you like a piece of gum, Lewis? No way, Lewis said. Later, Gilbert put a plastic spider on Lewis's desk when he wasn't looking. This is so fake, Lewis said when he handed it back. Then he slapped Gilbert on the back and said, your tricks are the worst. Do you notice Gilbert's name? It's spelled wrong. But Gilbert wasn't giving up. He still had a few more tricks up his sleeve. He also had a sign on his back that said, I smell. No wonder everyone was snickering as he walked to the cafeteria. Remember, snickering means laughing. Lewis, Gilbert grumbled. Before he ate, Gilbert first checked his seat for a whoopee cushion. There was none, so he sat down and opened his lunchbox. Suddenly, he jumped out of his seat and yelled, ah! There was a worm in his apple. It's just a gummy worm, Patty said. And look, there's a note. The note said, April Fool. It was signed, Mother. Gilbert couldn't believe it. Even his mother had tricked him. At recess, Frank said, watch out, Gilbert, there's a bee on your head. Gilbert swatted at his head while Frank laughed and said, April Fool. Margaret said, watch out, Gilbert, your shoe's untied. Gilbert bent to tie his shoe. Made you look, Margaret said. Gilbert sighed. He couldn't believe that he had fallen for that trick twice in one day. Then Philip shouted, watch out, Gilbert. But Gilbert wasn't going to get tricked again. He said, I'm not. But before he could finish, a kickball smacked him in the head. I told you to watch out, Philip said. I thought it was another trick, Gilbert groaned as he rubbed his head. This is the worst April Fool's Day ever. Everyone's playing tricks on me, but I can't trick anyone. I told you your tricks were bad, Lewis laughed. You'll never trick anyone. Gilbert said, "That's what you think, Louis. I have one more trick I've been saving just for you." Louis laughed again and said, "What is it?" "I'm not telling you. You'll have to wait and see." Gilbert whispered to Patty what his trick was. Patty said loudly, "You're right, Gilbert. That's the best trick ever." Louis snorted and said, "You'll never April fool me." As they walked back into the classroom, Gilbert said, "Oh, Louis, let me hold that door for you." Louis asked, "Is this your trick?" "No," said Gilbert. He held the door open and Louis walked through very quickly. During spelling, Louis couldn't find his eraser. Gilbert said, "Here, Louis, you can borrow mine." Louis looked at the eraser and said, "Is this a trick?" "No," said Gilbert. But Louis inspected the eraser very carefully before he used it. When they went to the art table, Gilbert pulled out a chair and said, "Here you go, Louis. Have a seat." Louis looked at the chair and said, "It's a trick, right?" "No," Gilbert said. But Louis checked the chair very carefully for a whoopee cushion before he sat down. When Louis got up to clean his brush, Gilbert said, "Be careful, Louis. Your shoe is untied." "Ha," Louis said. "I'm not falling for that old trick." But his shoe was untied, and Louis did fall when he stepped on the lace. Everyone laughed. "I told you it was untied," Gilbert said. "I thought it was your trick," Louis said, tying his shoe. "No," Gilbert said. "My trick is much better than that." Wonder what his trick's going to be. During quiet time, Gilbert brought a book to Louis and said, "I think you should read this, Louis. I really liked it." Louis wouldn't take the book. He said, "Is it a fake book? Is it glued shut? Is it going to squirt me when I open it?" Look at Louis's face. How do you think he might be feeling? Maybe a little afraid. "No," Gilbert said. "It's just a really good book." Louis took the book, but he couldn't concentrate on the story. He kept looking over his shoulder to see where Gilbert was. Louis was so busy watching out for Gilbert's trick, he didn't see Kenny putting a fake spider on his desk. Louis screamed when he saw it. "Gotcha," Kenny said. And when Patty told Louis his shoe was untied, he bent to tie it. "Gotcha," she said. And when Louis sat on his own whoopee cushion and Margaret said, "Gotcha," everyone laughed. When the bell rang, Louis finally shouted, "I give up, Gilbert. I can't stand it anymore. Do your trick already." Gilbert smiled and said, "There isn't any trick, Louis. I just made you think there was. You got April fooled." "Gotcha." So Gilbert really didn't have to do much. He just made Louis afraid of a trick, right? So that's kind of a funny story. So really quickly, maybe you noticed a few things. I'm going to show you a few things that I noticed when I was reading. So if you'll look at the sign for the school, it says town pool instead of town school. And look right here. This says exit instead of enter. Let's look at one more page. Look at who's sitting at the lunch table. Would an alien be sitting at the lunch table? That's another silly thing, isn't it? So maybe you noticed a few more things in this book. So I hope that you enjoyed this story, boys and girls. I hope you have a fun day today of learning and spending time with your family. Know that I miss you, and I cannot wait to see you soon. Have a great April 1st, April Fool's Day. Bye-bye.